Okay, looks like we'll go ahead and get started today. Welcome everyone to the December 1st meeting of the Business and Community Affairs Committee in the City of Norman. Today we have one item on the agenda, and that is a discussion regarding updates to the City of Norman building codes. I believe staff has a presentation for us, so if you do, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Greg Clark.
Thank you. So today we're going to be discussing updating the building codes here for the City of Norman. Before we get started, I'm going to give you a little background for everybody, and some of you all may have heard this before, but maybe not. So building codes in Oklahoma are actually adopted at the state level, and the group called the Oklahoma Uniform Building Code Commission, they adopt the codes and tell us, essentially the cities, these are the minimum standards for you all to follow. And so by statute, we're to follow their lead. There's been a couple of benchmarks in the last couple of years. September 14th of 21, the commission updated and basically mandated that the 2018 I codes and the 2017 NEC, that's the electric code, were the minimums, and that's mainly for commercial buildings. More recently, September 14th of this year, the OUBCC updated again, and this time informing us that now the new code for 1 and 2 family dwellings and townhomes is going to be the 2018 International Residential Code. A little bit about that body. There's technical committees they implore that take technical experts in that field, be it mechanical or residential or building code, architects, builders, and they review the code. It takes them a good year to review just the technical code. They make recommendations to a commission that kind of oversees all of it. That commission looks at their recommendations, accepts them, modifies them, rejections, and pushes it on to the legislator. And then at that point, the legislator or the governor himself actually is the one who ultimately approves these. So these have been mandated. Essentially we're being told that these are the codes we have to follow, but we still procedurally as a city go through the formal adoption process, and we do have the opportunity when we adopt it to make some changes to it as well. And so the presentation today is going to cover some of the highlights that just occurred in the code with a few tweaks that we were looking for here in Norman, Oklahoma. On this PowerPoint, if you have access to it from the website, there are 3 links there. So if you were curious, you could go follow any one of those 3 links. The first one is kind of the base code that's published at the national level at the ICC. There's a read-only version there. There's the rule changes by the commission that affect these subsequent codes also has a link. And there's actually an unofficial website. It's a third-party private website that's operated by a group called UpCodes. And the only reason I linked it is because what they have done is they have taken the state changes and overlaid them into the actual national changes. So from one website, you can actually see, the finished version of that code at the state level, which is very handy if you're trying to piece all this bit of information together. So just some resources there for anybody who's interested. So a little bit about the adoption that's taken place here in the city of Norman. So, again, these timelines, going back to 21 existed, and we've really worked for over a year now in updating these codes. And again, that was mainly outreach. And so there's some benchmarks, but we've tried to do outreach just day to day. We tell people in the field, we tell contractors, tell builders, any of the stakeholders that we deal with, we try to educate them that, hey, this is the current state adopted code. This is coming in the next year, and we've just had a continual outreach, just kind of passively as staff members to try to let people know that this is coming, and just to become educated and be prepared. But we've also had some more formal type engagements as well. The first one back on 7/28, we held a forum where we advertised it, and we had builders come and we educated them over mainly the changes of the residential code. And we had a second public type of outing where we on 8/16 where we were able to conclude and finish reviewing what we viewed as significant changes in the code itself. And there were some good discussions, some feedback taken from the crowd, and it was a pretty positive experience. the fourth bullet there, and this is still actually live to this day. So after that presentation, I sat down and recorded a webinar. And so if someone was interested about some of the more significant changes on the Development Services website, there is a webinar. It's about an hour and a half long. If my voice doesn't bore you too much, you can sit down and you can listen to a lot of the residential code changes that are going to be upcoming. So we put that out there with hopes that, as people would go, that again, they might see it even if they hadn't picked up on that. Another bit of outreach we did, there's different compilations, but we as a staff sat down and looked at some of the documents, and we found some, what we viewed were potentially some of the more important changes, be it to the mechanical code, the residential code, the building code. And we put those together and we sent those out, and we sent thousands of emails out to anybody who pulled a permit in the last, 365 days from when we ran that report. We sent an email to letting them know that these changes were coming and that they, what we saw as the significant changes to them. So those are just some of the steps we have made to try to outreach over the past year. And, this meeting is, nearing hopefully the end of that process. So getting into some of the changes that are in the code and that we're recommending as staff and looking for some feedback for, but there is some fee changes in the code. We weren't looking to do anything too dramatic with this, but we did have a couple areas that we haven't updated in some time. One of those was our reinspection and what we call base fee. This fee hasn't been updated since 2006. It's $25, and that's essentially what we charge if we have to come back and make what we call a reinspection. So just to give everybody an idea, in calendar year 21, we did over 27,000 inspections. 3,200 of that 27,000 were inspections that had a reinspection fee. So our recommendation, again, instead of the $25, was to up it to the $35.
And just for clarification, when we do a re-inspect, that's typically a result of the building owner not providing something, not necessarily that the city missed something and they have to come back out and re-inspect it.
Yeah, the normal pretense for a re-inspect fee would be we go view the work, either the work didn't pass because there was deficiencies we found, things of that nature. And the way, not every rejected inspection even has a re-inspect fee. Our staff has the discernment to charge the re-inspection fee or not charge it with the general goal being, if it's something that they should have known or, should have reasonably complied with, charge the re-inspect fee. But if it was a mistake that they could not have reasonably anticipated or was no fault of their own, something like that, then we do not. So we certainly do not always charge it. And so that was one recommendation. So the base fee, just as an idea, is basically our lowest cost permit, with how I would describe it. So some of the examples of where we charge a base fee would be a miscellaneous electrical permit, changing out of a plumbing system, be it a water heater, a sewer line. If you're replacing something like a furnace, irrigation system, just kind of standalone one-off, the much smaller permits are where we charge our base fee. And again, it hadn't been updated, in considerable amount of time, and we're, and that's generally the thought on that is we're going to probably make one trip out there to make that inspection. And so that's kind of what we're trying to establish there. So that was one fee recommendation we were trying to achieve. The next one, and this wasn't really so much a change, just more codifying some policy. We never really actually have had an established after-hours inspection program here in the city of Norman. And so we were, but we'd still actually occasionally do run after-hours inspections. We just kind of, I wouldn't say arbitrarily, but in the past we had charged $75 for each hour of inspection we had to make if somebody needed an after-hour inspection. And so we don't do very many of these. We might do a dozen of these a year. And so the pretense for something like this is generally it's a larger job. Say a car dealer wants to pour concrete Saturday morning, but they're not going to have their work ready till 5 a.m. They're going to work really hard up through the night, maybe get it done 10, 11 o'clock at night, and they want to start an early morning pour, and they really want us to go inspect that work. And it's super important to them. So in the past, we just would charge them $75, which, we worked with and was okay, but we didn't really have a codified plan for it. So the recommendation was to establish, that fee as a $200 charge. And then if that inspection required more than 2 hours of inspection time, $75 for an additional hour. And I do want to qualify, we do lots of other after-hour inspections that we don't charge this at all. So this is, again, somewhat at our discernment. I had one a couple weeks ago, just before Thanksgiving. Somebody had a gas line, and there was a gas line rupture. OG&E did some emergency work, pulled meters on 3 different homes. Technically, it was an after-hour inspection, right? But we did not charge, nor would we charge for some duress situation like that. We made the inspection in our normal platitude and just went on. So it's not really meant to be punitive. It's just meant to, establish some kind of order to it.
And that would be typically outside of 8 to 5, and then on weekends, I assume.
That would be correct. Yeah. And so the last change to the fee, and this is a fee I mentioned the Oklahoma Uniform Building Code Commission. When we issue a permit that is scoped in the single-family domain, they obligate us to collect a $4 permit fee. We've been doing that for years. It's not been officially a part of our fee structure. Legally, we were of the opinion that the way this fee was set up, we didn't actually have to have it legally codified in our fee schedule, but better practice was to show that fee as a part of the, in there. Just not that it's a huge deal, but just so if someone was to look at it, they'd know and it would be there. So as a part of updating it, we wanted to go ahead and put that fee in the fee schedule so that way it would show up. The state allows us to collect on that a 50-cent administration fee. So that would be a $4.50 fee, with $4 of it remitted to the state when we issue those permits. So again, not a big change, and it's really something we've had in policy now for a while anyway, but wanted to get it officially on there. I'll pause there for a minute. Any thoughts or questions, discussion there?
No, I think this is, you tied a lot of this to the idea of inflation. The fact that we haven't updated this in 16 years, dollar today is not worth what it was 2 years ago, so.
Right. I did a little research on it in the event that others were curious what other municipalities were doing for fees. Here's a few examples of them. If you look at re-inspect fees, Edmond was $50 for their first inspection. They went to $100 for subsequent. Oklahoma City, they had some variables to theirs, but theirs started off at $38.50 for a building inspection. I think it went to $42 for some of the trade type inspections. Moore was a flat $30. Yukon was an interesting one. They were a flat $30 for first 2 inspections, but then ascended to $60 if you had to have a third, basically if you had to have a third inspection. The base fleet fees were reflected there as well. The base fee we're setting is a little bit higher than what Edmond, Oklahoma City, and Moore are showing, although I will qualify, they had a lot of add-ons to those. So, for example, Oklahoma City is showing a $28 base fee, but if you were doing miscellaneous wiring and you had so many plugs or wires or, depending on how many outlets you were doing, they would add on to that fee. In Norman, we don't really worry about plumbing fixture counts or things like that when we're doing our base fees. So it should actually balance out and probably have us still be very competitive. One of the next changes we're recommending, and this is a local change. Historically in Norman, we've had 2 sets of fire codes, and one was the NFPA 1 code. And the prevention team mainly used that for a lot of their annual type inspections. And then we had the fire code itself, the IFC is what we call it. And for permitting and review, building plan review, that was kind of the code that was worked with. So we kind of had, for a long time, we've had 2 codes. Most of the time, those 2 codes would play nicely with each other, although occasionally they would not. There might be something in the NFPA standard that was more strict than what the fire code would say. So there was at least a scenario where we had just reviewed, just accepted, and just permitted a work, and then a year later when they do an annual inspection, something could exist that was it not in compliance with that second code? And the NFPA, there's a long history between NFPA and what we call the I codes. A lot of different people have had, are opinionated about which one's better, but in truth, they're both good codes. I'm not gonna, rip on one or praise the other, but the IFC code, it has all the provisions that are needed for, the prevention team to be able to do their job, and they certainly supported. Let's make it a little more. Let's get everybody on the same page. Let's go down to one code, keep it as the IFC, and not have these, potentially competing codes. Anything else?
No.
Okay. So that was a change we.
As somebody who's had to navigate both these codes professionally, moving to one or the other is extremely helpful.
That would kind of be the only thing is that NFPA is a standard that is not necessarily law unless referenced by code, but when we adopt it, we make it law.
Right.
And it's already hard enough to get through the process, so why make it harder?
I completely agree with that.
This is a change that we are recommending as staff, and this is a change to the building code. And what the heading here is universal changing stations. And so we've had a lot, there's been several advocates in my time here at the city who have, approached us about advocating for these, what they call a universal changing station. And these are changing stations, for, not children, but people with accessible needs, that aren't going to fit or work on a, like a diaper changing stations. And there's some pretty, some pictures there that kind of paint the picture of what we're talking about here. But there's, at this point, there's really nothing in the code. There will be in subsequent versions, and there's actually a mistake on my slide there. I apologize, but the 2024 version of the IBC actually codifies this as a requirement.
Okay.
And just to give people an idea, this is not going to be required in every commercial bathroom. The scoping of this is such that essentially when a family assisted bathroom is required by code, then at that point they should be putting in this universal changing station. So most of the time the family assisted bathrooms are larger anyway. They would almost always have a diaper changing station. So dimensionally it could have some impact on what a family bathroom would require, but not dramatically. I was talking to the advocate yesterday before the meeting, and she informed me that the City of Oklahoma City, and I looked at their amendment. They have a proposed amendment that has been approved that when they update, which may be 6 months, maybe a year away, that it's going to be included in their code. Apparently, the City of Owasso has a similar amendment that's going to go in their code. And so I put some language, if you look at the attachments today, in there reflecting some of the research I had done, but looking at what Oklahoma City and the language that Owasso is using. I'd actually like to change the language that I put in the draft ordinance that was provided today to reflect what was in the Owasso's and Oklahoma City's, just to create uniformity.
Okay.
And just to, if people are curious, like, well, when is a family bathroom, assist type restroom required? I put a few different examples on here in the PowerPoint. So, for example, a restaurant, it wouldn't require a family assist bathroom unless you had 450 occupants.
Okay.
A church, 675. Retail, 3,000. A theater, 570. So, I mean, I don't see this as a terribly burdensome change to somebody wanting to do a small restaurant or bars or scenario like this. This is going to be for much larger occupants than.
And I did a quick calculation. So a 450 square foot or occupant restaurant would be 7,000 square feet in the dining area alone.
Oh, wow.
So that's a
There you
pretty
go.
good size facility. I mean, I think at that point, you're reaching a different scale, and at that point, you've got to provide different services. So, Councilmember Holman.
This is all new construction and remodels. Is that how I understand it?
The
Or would
scoping.
apply to?
My intention was to write this into the IBC, so that would be for new construction. At this time, with all the variables, it kind of being new technology, I was a little hesitant to write it into what we call the existing building code and scope it there until it's kind of been flushed out for a code cycle or two. So the way I proposed it and intend to write it, unless given other direction, would be new construction.
Okay. Thanks.
I think that's a smart way to approach it.
It's another change that shows up, and this was not a staff change, but this was done at the national level, and it's just for some information, and that is manual J and S's. And so, for a little background, when someone proposes a mechanical system, it requires the installer to run what they call a manual J and S, which is a calculation method to determine how big of a unit to put in this home, how much tonnage or BTUs needs to be in the home. That requirement has been in the code for years. I mean, it's been in the code for a long time that when people put these in, they're supposed to be running these calculations. What is new to the code is two things. One, at the national level, and I know it's not super clear, or maybe it is, but at the bottom of the slide, you'll see an input area there, which is manual J design criteria. Now, locally, we have to put in the set point data for those manual Js, which is a pretty big change, and something, frankly, as a staff, we weren't really sharp on, and we've had to do a lot of research on. So there's a lot of different set points that are required to be put into there. After a lot of discussions with builders and some energy experts as well, it's one of the challenges. If we put a value in there and it was a really low value, for example, or a really high value, it could potentially have real world impact. So if I put a low value in there and now someone is sitting at home and they like to have their house at 70 degrees and on the hottest 2 days of the year, it won't get there. And so that was a real concern for me, as I didn't want everybody who was uncomfortable on July 14th to be giving me a call. And so after some discussion and research here, what I found out is there's a lot of different methods to get to these set point data. There's 3 or 4 different approved design guidelines out there that a person can use. Speaking to one of the energy experts in the state that I know, he was actually very kind and has provided the values for us in a range fashion.
Awesome.
And so I don't have these in the PowerPoint today, although they do show up in the draft ordinances there. He was able to give me a range, a high point and a low point. So that way we have a much greater flexibility when we approach these. And so he provided that to us and subsequently all the other jurisdictions around the state, with the hope that, this task of folks like myself, the building official, being the bad guy because it's too hot or too cold on these extremes, will be mitigated. And so my intention is to go with that engineer's recommendation and put this range of values in there,
Yep.
Allowing flexibility, and these set points are defendable positions. So
Well, I personally think that's the way to go too, because at least there's some hope for some consistency across municipalities, so that we're not apples to apples, trying to outdo other communities.
And kind of the second trigger in this discussion is at the state level, when they adopted it, they made a requirement that when we issue permits for single family for new construction, that we now will require a copy of that manual J. Which again, it doesn't really impact a lot. And on the one hand, on the other, it could be a pretty big departure, because right now when we issue a mechanical permit for a new single family, I mean, there's really not a submittal process. There's a license process. We make sure that the contractors are licensed. If they are licensed and they're in good standing, we're able to issue them the permit. Now with this requirement of the city, having to have a copy of the manual J's, that means before we issue the mechanical permit, we'll have to receive a copy of that document. And so that will be a bit of a change. Again, that occurred at the state level, so it won't just be the city of Norman. It'll be all the other jurisdictions, but there could certainly be some different approaches from jurisdiction to jurisdiction about how they do that. On one hand, somebody could do a really thorough review and have a dedicated staff member, and the other, they could simply say, okay, do you have your submittal, accept the submittal, and move on with it. So,
If that'll be required to have an engineer stamp, or that will be able to be done by the contractor?
they can mostly do those as a contractor. And
Shouldn't be any extra cost, just maybe a little extra time.
if they weren't running a manual J before,
They were doing it without.
yeah, if they were, and so there is basically there are certainly some folks out there who weren't running manual J's.
Gotcha.
And they were just going, okay, how many square feet is it? Is, okay.
Right.
I believe 500 square foot is 1 ton, and they sized it and they went on their way, right? And so the person who's been doing that, if they're now having to provide this manual J, that would be a change of business for them.
Okay.
So the next change is, again, mostly just codifying some local practices. And we kind of had this discussion last time we talked about carports, so I'll give you a little background here. So I'll skip to my second slide first. The code, the way it is written, really has what we call a prescriptive foundation system. And there's more than one foundation system. There's concrete foundations, there's block foundations, there's weirdly wood foundations that no one's ever built. But we see 99% of what we see is concrete foundations. And it's a prescriptive foundation. And what you see in the picture there is an excavated hole, minimum 12 inches wide, 18 inches deep with reinforcing in there. And basically from a black and white standpoint, this is what the code gives us for a foundation system. Now we have had in the past a local amendment that said, okay, well, if the structure we're talking about building today is of a certain character, we're going to exempt you from this chapter of the code, knowing that there's other ways to build and secure property, knowing that to require the foundation would probably double the cost of the building. You can see in my picture there kind of 3 examples. You have a small storage shed that probably will hold nothing more than a lawnmower, a carport that's secured to either the ground or a slab or or similar, and then the third picture is presumably something like a tiny home. And so we have had it written in the code to exempt some of these smaller structures, and I wanted to clarify that a little bit because essentially what we have done in the past is for these structures uninhabitable about 600 feet, we have not required the prescriptive foundation. If it was a habitable, occupiable structure, we've exempted them if they were less than 400 square feet or thereabouts. And so the 400 square foot had not been written into the code previously. The 600 on the unoccupied structure was codified in prior editions. As a part of the discussion, I did feel like, I thought it was a good point we were having when we were talking about carports. I did include some additional language that even though we're exempting these structures from Chapter 4, there still should be at least 4 points of contact to the earth or the ground or a foundation system. It's written in such a way that there is some interpretation and allowance there, but still something to hopefully mitigate just a small wind or something like that blowing over or causing disturbance to the structure. Because if you see in the slides to the right there, the pictures in the slides to the right, those auger type systems that we see all the time with mobile homes, carports, again, they're not really a prescriptive method. And but for us to tell someone that, okay, those fastening systems, we can't accept those. We can, but we need an engineer. Or no, you need to go build this 12-inch by 18-inch prescriptive footing. I mean, if we made people do that for these carports and small accessory structures, we would really drastically impact. And frankly, most jurisdictions for these less phenomenal structures have similar practices, but they're not always codified. And so we just wanted to update that, get it codified. So basically what we're doing and what we've been approving is consistent with the code that we've adopted locally.
And will we have a prescriptive code for what the footings on these smaller projects will look like? I mean, it looks like on the storage shed, that's just kind of a pier with, still a concrete pier with maybe a wood column holding it above or something, or are we just kind of leaving that up to, the manufacturer of that particular unit or the carport, what their recommendations are?
The way it would be evaluated would be, from a staff perspective, if it was just that, it would be, okay, do you have those 4 points of connection that we have written as a prescriptive requirement? And it's really left there because there really wouldn't be a good way to prescriptively write into the code, something about these augers, like
Right.
thou shall use a 2 foot auger with a 6-inch head that's
Sure.
this gauge of steel. I mean, I wish there was. I really wish the code had some of these methods, more prescribed in there. They just don't.
No, that makes sense. I think that's fair. Councilmember Holman.
Yeah, that exact carport is the one that I had concern about. Because like it looks like it's just sitting on top of the gravel there, right? And so Oklahoma high winds come in underneath there and pick it up like a wing or a parachute and flip it over and blow it into somebody else's property or whatnot. And so that was kind of my concern in that discussion about how those are secured to the ground. Because a lot of those older ones I've noticed that we have in town seem to be like anchored in the ground with concrete footings. And they may be 40, 50 years old and they've withstood weather all those years. But they seem to be more secure than maybe just a stake in the ground or something that's...
I feel like most of what we see these days is probably these auger style. You see the picture to the center picture there. Most of the ones we see today, in the framework itself, there's a notched out hole and they auger it in first, and they take a bolt or piece of hardware after the fact and slide it into that frame, into that auger. And that's probably mostly what we are seeing today on those style carports. And we haven't, again, doesn't mean we can't or won't, especially if we have a huge wind event, but haven't seen a lot of evidence where that style of connection has been a problem or failing. But it is a downdraft or a tornado or something like that could certainly change things.
On that prescriptive code foundation minimums, it doesn't show that pin between the footing and the stem wall?
It does. It's kind of light, and if it was darker, I believe you could see the shading. But there is a.
Oh, is it labeled there?
Yeah, there is a number 4 dial showing.
Oh, okay.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah, if we dim the lights, you could see it a little bit better.
Okay.
And sir, we typically don't take public comment at these meetings, but if you wouldn't mind identifying yourself for the record.
Okay.
Would you mind?
Yeah, Todd Booz.
Okay, appreciate that, thank you. I mean, I'm happy to meet with you afterwards and get any questions or feedback that you have on this, but typically we don't open up to public comments.
Any other questions on foundations?
It's been clear.
So one of the next changes, and it's just more a highlight, and it has to do with the energy code, and I just wanted to bring it to attention. City of Norman has an energy efficient credit. The state did update the energy code somewhat. They updated what they call the ERI, which is a scoring system for how energy efficient a home is. They made that score a 64. And I just wanted to point out that our above code program that we have here in Norman, which is still ongoing, we made the benchmark at 57, which, last time when we actually updated it, we weren't still 100% sure what the state was going to do with an ERI or where the energy code would go, but it looks like in my opinion, we did a pretty good job of guesstimating it. And so our above code program is still at a 57 as compared to the state's 64. And in this case, the lower the number, the more efficient the home is.
Okay.
So we had part of our outreach process. We had a public comment form, and so we shared that at both the meetings. We sent that out to the builders and any of the stakeholders. We put it on our website, and it was a public comment form asking for any public input if you had a code change request or similar. And we sent it out. We didn't have a lot of feedback, but we did have one public comment submission. And I did inform the individual today that this would be on the agenda, but they're not here to represent this. So I guess I'll summarize what is in the comment form. There's a section of code that deals with ice barriers. And an ice barrier is it's in a kind of a more enhanced method. I'll skip to the next slide and show you there. And if you look at the edge of that roof there, you'll see that the black shading that is a membrane that attaches to the perimeter of a roof. And the submitter was asking that we consider mandating by code that ice barrier, if you will, be installed around the eaves or the soffits of the home around the entire perimeter. The code as written does not require it that way. In fact, there's been a very long discussion on this item. In fact, and I apologize, I actually invited Mr. Booz as well today, in the event there was going to be a discussion on it, with the roofer too, just to get different inputs.
My apologies for not realizing that.
I'm sorry.
I don't need to be here. I got other things to do.
No,
So, I
no,
mean-
we've had some issues with in the past.
You're just a random.
Yeah, we've had people show up and, try to hijack meetings before, so I just tried to.
Okay.
Anyway, but they're not here. But anyway, but the request was made to add this ice barrier around the perimeter of the house as kind of an above code program. A little background on it. This went through a state adoption. There was a technical committee at the state level that reviewed this change, and there was a committee of roofers and a committee of builders put together to answer a whole bunch of questions about roofs, but this was one of them reviewed at the state level. And they went through the whole commission process. They reviewed it. It was ultimately determined at the state level to not require that ice barrier at the eave. Now you'll see in the picture there, they're showing an ice barrier in the valley. Now that was actually, even though it wasn't in the code, that same committee made the recommendation to go ahead and add it into the valleys. This picture doesn't show it well, but that same committee also made a recommendation to add this ice barrier into the pitch changes, where two pieces of the roof kind of have a differing elevation. And so ice barrier it got reviewed at the state. They added the ice barrier in several spots, but they did not add it at the eaves. A lot of the roofers would like to see it added at the eaves. I'll just be blunt and say most all the builders I have talked to on the topic, they don't believe that it should be added at the eaves. And so there's this ongoing back and forth discussion. It was reviewed at the state. In a large part, it was ultimately decided at the state not to adopt it. Most recently, the city of Oklahoma City was going through some of their code adoption. They had a two-part meeting that lasted, I believe, over 4 hours between several meetings, where this was pretty much the sole topic of the meeting. Again, after that entire process, the city of Oklahoma City also did not choose to elect it. Speaking as my opinion now, as building official with construction experience, my recommendation is not to require it at the eaves. I have not seen the need for it. I haven't seen the requirement. Haven't got the feedback. Haven't seen it personally myself. That what would they call ice damming is a huge concern around the perimeter of these houses, and so.
So it would still be required in the valleys, skylights and chimneys?
It would be required at the valleys, it would be required at the pitch changes. It would not be required, it shows skylight here, I do not believe that's a state requirement, and I don't believe the chimney is a state requirement, just the best picture I could find for you.
So we would just be proposing to require it in the valleys also.
Yes, we'd be just,
Should be in alignment with what.
just stay in alignment with the state, stay in alignment with what it looks like Oklahoma City is going to do on their ultimate adoption as well, and require it in those two locations.
Do we know if they're gonna make that commitment before we make ours, essentially?
Well, yes and no. Go ahead. Can I defer to Todd? He was a part of that
Yeah,
discussion.
at Oklahoma City, yeah, no, they codified it in the city council meeting.
Okay.
That not to be required to be done just
Okay.
a couple months ago.
Excellent.
So,
They're updating their codes to
knew they
the
were doing
18 as
that.
well, so
Yeah.
it's kind of two separate processes. So yeah, no, I would recommend following the state requirement, staying there, and keeping it. I will say that the submitter's submission to give to make sure I vet it fully, the scope of where they asked for it to be done was not on all new construction. It was only on what they call re-roofs. So they were asking for it just in the scenario where you had an existing roof, the roof, had hail damage or whatever the need was, it was replaced, then requiring it then. Which, in my mind, if I was going to require it, I would want to require it for new construction and for re-roofing, not just one. It seems like if you were going to do it, if there was a perceived need, you would want to do it across the board, not just in one scope.
Right. I agree with that.
And so I guess that's kind of the last slide. I'm definitely looking for any input you all have, especially on that comment form. If you have any direction or thoughts about which way we should go, we give you our staff recommendation there.
Just on the ice dam issue, I mean, is there an exemption in the code that if you provide insulation in your attic, that you don't have to provide the extra level of protection for the ice dam? Because I mean, that's typically where those come from, is you've got warm air underneath, hot, cold air above, and it melts ice and create, I mean, it's kind of a chain effect. So I didn't know if there was any kind of exception in the code.
There's not one built in that I'm aware of. No.
Well, I don't have any questions other than, you know, what we've talked about already, and I think there wasn't anything in here that gave me a whole lot of heartburn or pause. So, Councilman Holman, do you have anything that sticks out to you?
Just seems like the ice, severe storms like that are something to keep an eye on about how frequent or severe they may be. And, but yeah, I don't really have any
Right.
To me, it
further
sounds
questions
like,
about it. It sounds pretty
Well,
clear.
The ice damming for it to really, and I guess there's some debate on this, but for ice damming to really be an issue, you'd have to have sustained snow on a roof for quite a duration. I mean, you know, most.
Not likely here.
I mean,
Just get a heavy
I mean,
Monday snow.
yeah, a heavy Monday snow that's gone by Tuesday
Yeah.
wouldn't produce an ice dam. But you know, certainly the requirement is a huge need if you're up in the north or somewhere like there where you're going to have snow on your roof for the duration of winter. Then there's almost no question you would
Right.
absolutely.
because
You're-
it's the snow underneath that melts and then freezes again and then melts and freezes again, and you build this build up.
Right, it would saturate and puncture through over time.
To me, it sounded like 90% of this stuff was just getting in line with the state adoption of the code. So I don't personally have a problem with it, but if I hear anything, I'll let you know.
Very good.
If there's nothing further, this meeting is adjourned.
Awesome.
Appreciate it, guys.
He regrets it. My flash, I'm coming.